Days after his body was laid to rest, in the cold, silent chambers of the Spanish court, a group of physicians gathered around the corpse of their king. They sharpened their blades, not for healing, but for revelation. They were about to perform an autopsy, and what their knives would uncover was so blood-curdling, it would explain the tragic collapse of an entire empire. This is the story of King Charles II of Spain, the last hope of the powerful Habsburg dynasty. And he was a hope built on a foundation of ruin. From the very moment he was born, the whispers began. The midwives and courtiers looked at the fragile infant and knew, in their hearts, that he was not built for a long life. He was the product of generations, a closed loop of royal blood, a victim of decades of relentless inbreeding. When his rule finally came, it was bitter, brief, and it doomed everything it touched. Our story begins in 1661, in a palace that was already smelling of decay. Charles was born into a dynasty that was failing. His father, the mighty King Philip IV, had failed to produce a living male heir from his first marriage. In a desperate move, he married his own niece, Mariana of Austria. The Habsburgs were infamous for this, for turning their family tree into a tangled wreath, always circling back on itself. They believed it kept their bloodline pure, their power consolidated. But they were unknowingly weaving a genetic noose. And Charles was the one who would have to wear it. He was sickly from the start, a child perpetually on the brink. As a young boy, he endured a brutal gauntlet of potentially fatal illnesses. Measles, chickenpox, rubella, and the dreaded smallpox. Each one a storm his tiny body was forced to weather. And against all odds, he survived them all. But he did not emerge unscathed. The trials left their marks. He developed rickets, a cruel condition that weakens the bones, often due to a lack of sun and nourishment. So frail were his legs that he was forced to wear painful iron braces until he was 5 years old, planking through the marble halls as a living symbol of his own fragility. But his most infamous burden, the one that would define him in portraits and in whispers, was with him from birth. It was the Habsburg Jaw. Some called it the Austrian lip, a deformity that plagued both the Spanish and Austrian sides of the family. It was a jaw that jutted out from the face, a massive, protruding lower mandible that created a severe underbite. It was the physical stamp of his bloodline, the mark of the Habsburgs. And in Charles, this family trait found its most extreme expression. His case was the most severe, the most pronounced, the most grotesque on record. It wasn't just a matter of appearance. It was a functional catastrophe. One of his contemporaries wrote that his lower jaw was so distinct from his upper that he could not chew his food. Imagine that. A king who could not perform the basic act of eating. His solution, reportedly, was as tragic as it was simple. He would swallow his food whole, like a bird, leading to a lifetime of debilitating stomach problems and constant indigestion. And the curses did not end there. Charles also suffered from an enlarged tongue, so large that it lay thick and cumbersome in his mouth, making his speech slurred, difficult, and almost unintelligible. There are reports from within the court that he could not speak at all until the age of 4, and was treated as an infant, coddled and pitted, until he was at least 10 years old. Is it any wonder, then, that he earned the nickname that would follow him to his grave? They called him El Hechizado, the Bewitched. In 1665, when Charles was just 4 years old, his father, King Philip IV, died. The crown of a global empire was placed upon the head of a toddler who could barely walk without his leg braces. Power, as nature abhors a vacuum, rushed in to fill the void. His mother, Mariana of Austria, swiftly seized control as regent, becoming the true ruler of Spain, a queen in all but name. By the time Charles was old enough to theoretically take the reins of power, the Kingdom of Spain was a colossus with feet of clay. It was massive, spanning continents, but it was in dire existential trouble. The Little Ice Age decades earlier had devastated crops, leading to famine and a shattered economy. Spain was now deeply in debt, a fading power dependent on its rivals, the rising empires of Britain, France, and the Netherlands. And as king, it became painfully clear that Charles would not be a glorious solo ruler. His physical and likely cognitive disabilities made him ill-suited for the brutal game of the throne. His court, for the rest of his life, became a snake pit of intrigue, controlled by ambitious courtiers, calculating counselors, and his own powerful mother, all grasping for the power he embodied but could not wield. Visiting foreign diplomats often wrote conflicting reports about him. Some found him amiable, even surprisingly generous with his time and the kingdom's dwindling resources. But they all noted a deep, ingrained flaw, a crippling lack of self-confidence. In the middle of crucial international talks, he would fall into spells of profound shyness, unable to project the authority required of a monarch. Worse still were the reports of his mental state. Charles suffered from debilitating bouts of depression, a deep, dark melancholy that would swallow him whole, leaving him isolated in his own gilded cage.
The choice for Charles's next successor gave Queen Maria Anna even more reason to crow. The new candidate was none other than her own nephew, the Archduke Charles of Austria. Though there was intense bickering over how much of the Spanish Empire Archduke Charles would actually get, the Austrian faction was overjoyed. It seemed their victory was assured. But it would not last. In late 1700, Charles's health took its final, fatal turn. After a lifetime of suffering from stomach issues and having immense difficulty ingesting food, Charles grew so ill that he wasn't able to eat at all. Starting in October, he began to waste away before everyone's eyes, his already frail body consuming itself. There was no more time left. And in these final, desperate hours, his disgruntled courtiers made their checkmate move. Many of Charles's Spanish courtiers, particularly the powerful Castilian faction, had long despised his wife, Maria Anna. They believed that a French successor, rather than an Austrian one, would allow Spain to keep the greater part of its lands intact after Charles died. So they did what any power-hungry courtiers would do in the age of absolute monarchy. They approached their king on his deathbed, a man barely clinging to life, and pushed their agenda. An archbishop from the pro-French faction successfully convinced the ailing, broken king to change his will one last time, to appoint Philip of Anjou, the grandson of his old rival, King Louis XIV of France, as his official heir. On the 1st of November, 1700, just before his 39th birthday, King Charles II's beleaguered body finally gave out. The suffering was over. Philip of Anjou was proclaimed King of Spain, and Charles's queen, Maria Anna, once poised to be the most powerful regent in Europe, was stripped of her power and exiled to Toledo, a forgotten relic of a failed plan. In the end, all the treaties, all the discussions, all the scheming around Charles's heir weren't enough to avert disaster. The War of the Spanish Succession erupted in Europe almost instantly, a conflict that would last for 13 brutal years, drawing in all the major powers. When the dust finally settled, Charles's worst nightmare had become reality. Though Philip was still king, Spain had been carved up, losing its European territories like Belgium, Italy, and Gibraltar. The global Spanish Empire was shattered, and the Spanish Habsburg dynasty was well and truly gone, erased from history. But our story ends where it began, in that dark room, with the physicians and their knives. In the days following the king's death, the attendants performed their autopsy on his remains. And from the state of his body, it was a miracle he had lived as long as he did. The internal landscape was a map of a lifetime of decay and suffering. His heart was found to be unusually small, the size of a peppercorn. His lungs were corroded, struggling to the very end. His intestines were rotten and gangrenous, a testament to a digestive system that had never functioned properly. And then, they found the ultimate, physical explanation for the end of his bloodline. They discovered that Charles possessed only a single, atrophied testicle, and it was black as coal, a clear indication that it had died long ago. From this horrifying discovery, historians now believe that, as his wife Maria Anna may have quietly suspected, Charles was wholly, completely sterile at the end of his life, likely for much of it. The story of King Charles II of Spain is not just a historical footnote. It is a centuries-old cautionary tale written in blood and DNA. It is a story about the profound horrors of inbreeding, the last, gasping breath of a failing dynasty, and the delicate, knife-edge balance of power that can be shattered by the suffering of just one man. He was the bewitched king, and his curse was his own blood. If you love uncovering the darkest, most fascinating stories in history, you've found your new home. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we delve deep into the secrets the history books barely dare to mention. And for more incredible facts about everything from history to science, don't forget to visit our main page, your channel/website name, linked in the description below. The story doesn't end here.
Yet, for all his inadequacies, there was one thing everyone in Europe agreed Charles was good for: marriage. A king was a strategic piece on the continental chessboard, and his marriage could secure a vital alliance. The year Charles turned 18, one of his ministers brokered a match designed to tie Spain to its powerful neighbor. The bride was the 17-year-old Marie-Louise of Orleans. She was the niece of the legendary King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, and the beloved daughter of the Duke of Orleans. Marie-Louise was everything the Spanish court was not. She was young, vibrant, pretty, and cultured, a darling of the most dazzling court in Europe. And she was heartbroken, for Marie-Louise was deeply in love with her cousin, the Dauphin of France, the heir to the French throne. When the elders in her life coldly informed her that she was to be packed off to a foreign land to marry the deformed, bewitched King of Spain, the poor girl was utterly devastated. Contemporary accounts say she spent the weeks leading to her departure weeping, mourning the life and the love she was being forced to abandon. In August of 1679, Marie-Louise and Charles were married by proxy. The official ceremony took place that November, just weeks after Charles's 18th birthday. It was a union born of cold political calculation. But then, something unexpected happened. According to all reports, Charles the Bewitched, the man who had known little but pity and scorn, looked upon his beautiful young wife and fell deeply, genuinely, and passionately in love with her. He would remain devoted to her until the very end of her days. For nearly a decade, Charles and Marie-Louise lived as husband and wife, and for nearly a decade, they tried desperately to produce an heir, a child who would carry on the Habsburg name and secure the Spanish succession. But no child came. The court, a viper's nest of gossip, was quick to place the blame squarely on the young queen. Infertility was always a woman's fault. The pressure on Marie-Louise was immense, crushing. In response, she began a brutal and dangerous fertility regime. She consumed potions and elixirs full of toxic substances, all thought to help her body conceive. These archaic treatments did nothing to make her pregnant, but they wreaked havoc on her system, giving her chronic intestinal issues and poisoning her from within. Then, in February of 1689, 9 years into her marriage, tragedy struck. Marie-Louise was out riding on the palace grounds when she was suddenly doubled over by a vicious, stabbing pain in her abdomen. She was rushed back to her chambers, where she was seized by convulsions and violent vomiting. The court physicians were summoned, but they could do nothing. It was immediately clear she was on her deathbed. A frantic message was sent to Charles, who rushed to her side. As he knelt by his dying wife, she looked at him, the man who had loved her so unconditionally, and she whispered her final words. They were a heartbreaking testament to a relationship that had somehow found love in a place of utter darkness. "Your Majesty may be with many women," she said, "but none will love him more than I do." Her death sent the court into a spiral of panic and paranoia. The Kingdom of Spain had enough enemies, and the succession was so perilously unresolved that many believed, and still believe, that Marie-Louise had been poisoned, murdered to usher the realm closer to its destruction. But given her symptoms, modern historians are almost certain she died from appendicitis, a simple inflammatory condition that her endless, desperate fertility treatments may have severely exacerbated. Her death left a void not just in Charles's heart, but in the very strategy of the Spanish crown. They needed an heir, and they needed one immediately. Just weeks after his queen's passing, Charles's mother, the ever-scheming Mariana, selected a new bride for her son. Her name was Maria Anna of Neuburg. This choice was a deliberate political snub to the French. Maria Anna was from the Austrian side of the Habsburg alliances, and she was chosen specifically for her vehement hatred of France. But politics wasn't her only qualification. By now, Spain was desperate for an heir, and Maria Anna came with a secret weapon, her family's legendary fertility. With a mind-boggling 16 siblings, she came from an enormously prolific line. And at just 22 years old on the day of their proxy wedding in August of 1689, Maria Anna seemed to have both the biological capability and the time to finally provide the Spanish crown with the heir it so desperately craved. But what the Spanish court wasn't expecting was her cunning. Maria Anna was no naive young girl. She knew she was a Hail Mary pass, a last, desperate attempt. And she was no doubt aware of the fate of her barren predecessor, Marie Louise. So, to stave off the poisonous rumors and to protect her own position, Maria Anna began a clever, deceitful game. She frequently and publicly claimed she was pregnant. She would exhibit symptoms, allow the news to spread through the court, and then, when no child materialized, she would blame a miscarriage. This relentless performance was enough to continually push the cloud of suspicion away from her and onto Charles. As Charles's second, childless marriage dragged on, the problems for his throne multiplied catastrophically. In 1690, Spain was dragged into the 9 Years' War against France and its European allies. The empire was too weak, its finances too strained. Just 2 years into the conflict, Spain had to declare bankruptcy. For years later, in 1696, they had lost almost all of Catalonia to the French. And it's crucial to understand, a primary reason this war started in the first place was because of Charles. His inability to produce an heir had thrown the entire balance of European power into jeopardy. Every monarch, every ambassador, every general was watching the Spanish court, their plans wound tighter than springs. They all knew that if Charles died without a son, his enormous global kingdom would have no clear ruler, sparking a succession crisis that would inevitably draw everyone into war. In 1696, as these external pressures mounted, Charles suffered a devastating personal blow. His mother, Mariana of Austria, the woman who had controlled his life and his kingdom since he was a child, died at the age of 61. She likely succumbed to breast cancer. Her passing deprived the Spanish court of its most experienced and stabilizing force for decades. In the wake of his mother's death, a stronger king might have stepped up and finally seized the power that was rightfully his. But Charles did not. He stepped aside, and into this power vacuum rose a new, formidable figure, his wife, Maria Anna. She quickly began to run the court's political factions, maneuvering and scheming just as her mother-in-law had. And she did it with one overriding goal in mind. Both Mariana and Maria Anna were staunch supporters of the Austrian faction in the Spanish court. They were vehemently opposed to the rival French faction. These two sides fought over every scrap of influence. But their ultimate, existential goal was to control who would be named Charles's successor. Would it be an Austrian candidate or a French one? As Charles's health continued its slow, irreversible decline, Maria Anna had to put all her cunning into overdrive. The stakes were the future of Spain itself. In 1698, 2 years after his mother's demise, Charles fell terrifyingly, deathly ill. It seemed the end was near. Spain and the rest of Europe launched into a frantic round of urgent talks, desperate to officially name a successor and hopefully avoid an all-out continental war when Charles finally passed. When the talks concluded, a decision was made. Charles was ready to name Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria as his heir. This was a huge victory for Maria Anna and the Austrian faction. In fact, she had every reason to be pleased. She and young Joseph were from the same noble house. When Charles officially published his will that November, he didn't just name Joseph Ferdinand as his successor. In a move that shocked the court, he also appointed his wife, Maria Anna, as regent for the boy should he come to power while still a minor. Charles's will was supposed to bring stability, to calm the turbulent waters. Instead, when the court heard that he was granting such power to his already scheming wife, their reaction was reportedly a stunned, complete, and ominous silence. But in 1699, death returned, and it threw everything back into chaos. And believe it or not, it wasn't Charles II who perished. That year, his chosen heir, the young Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria, died unexpectedly. The news sent a shockwave through every capital in Europe, throwing them back into a frantic scramble for treaties for the second time in as many years.